Conversations with the inspiring minds, using design and creativity towards social change. This is Design for the People with Greg Bunbury.
Hello and welcome to Design for the People. I'm your host, Greg Bunbury, and on this show, I'll be speaking to the designers, artists, creative thinkers, and activists using their skills to tackle social issues, uplift communities, and make a difference in the world. For those of you watching on YouTube, if you're enjoying this content, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps grow our audience and amplifies our guests. Now, joining me on today's show is creative director Juan Roberts. Hailing from Greater Los Angeles, Juan got his start after marketing flyers and business cards to salons and barbershops for 5 years, after which he co-founded an ad agency which he grew into a $10 million business. After he cashed out, he joined another firm at which his work garnered upwards of $50 billion in market share and volume for an A-list of global brands like Chrysler, Coke, American Airlines, and more. Since then, his focus has been on developing his boutique firm, serving the Black community with a focus on book design and the self-publishing industry across fashion, cultural events, and faith-orientated communications. His work empowers independent publishers with mainstream quality, strategy, and insight. Juan, welcome to the show.
It's good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
That's no problem at all. Thank you for joining us. So just some background for our listeners. I first encountered Juan's work via a Facebook group for Black designers, where we had a few interesting initial conversations regarding the work of legendary designer Emory Douglas. And what I found really interesting about his career was that it epitomizes the idea of being of service and what it truly means to serve a niche. So Juan, can you tell us a little about your background and your journey into design thus far?
Well, you kind of touched on it in the intro. I was back in the day, we called it commercial art. So in high school, I took commercial art and did all the kind of perfunctory things going through the various creative skill sets. We didn't have computers back then. So it was all hand done. It was metal and wood and clay and drawing and different techniques on how to create visual content, or what we call media. And went to art school like I was supposed to. My parents were, got to go to college, so forth. I did all that. Yeah. However, around the 8th day, we had finished our first assignment. We were supposed to draw, I think it was a milk carton. And then we took the drawings and put them on the wall, and the teacher was doing assessments. And something really struck me. I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking about all the stuff I wanted to do. Hip hop was like this burgeoning thing happening somewhere out there in the world. Right. And music was popping, fashion was popping. There were other things going on in culture. And this is 1977. Okay. And I didn't want to be drawing milk cartons. So I got up after, he did his critique. And I said, thank you very much. And I never went back, and I've never looked back. So left there, went to go get into fashion. I wanted to be a fashion illustrator. And that was an intersection between fashion and in the 70s, between music and culture and, of course, fabrics and things like that. But around that was a whole lifestyle. Of course, there was drugs and sex and all kinds of things going on in the business. I wasn't really directly involved with that, but I was adjacent. Sure. But I learned so much as a kid. I was probably in a lot of places I had no business being. Right. Doing a lot of things that most 17-year-olds were not involved in. But it heightened my ability and awareness of what was going on creatively. Gotcha. And it strengthened my ability to hustle big time. Crazy hustle. But it also kind of burned me out a little bit. Right. I think that's the term we use. I was really just a little more intimidated because the higher you go in that business, the more experimental you have to become, let's say. Just put it in a nice way. Sure. I wasn't that guy. I'm just not that guy. I'm a Midwest guy, much more sensible about life. And I backed off got to get to know my family a little bit more in the city of Detroit, because I grew up in Milwaukee as a kid.
Right.
But between Milwaukee and Detroit, I spent most of my summers in Detroit. So I went to Detroit, got to know my family, met my wife there, raised a family, and all this other career stuff took place at the same time.
So how did you find yourself in such an explosive commercial environment where you're going from basically hustling flyers and other marketing materials to growing a $10 million ad agency?
Well, I tell you, part of what I just shared with you put a pin in that for what took place in the fashion industry, because it was so intense. It was very, very fast. So this move to Detroit was only in 1980, so it was only 3 years later, maybe a little less than 3 years later. But there's a thing called the Mac that came out in 84. And see, all my stuff was done with letraset and burnishers, and you know how we used to lay down letters and numbers and so forth, and cut with razors on
That's how we started too,
and all that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was doing, all my work was done that way. But when the Mac came out, you had to go to linotype services, and there were very few in the city of Detroit. So it was a convergence of ad agency, design firms, and people like me having to go get high-res output of this new Macintosh type. In that small space office, all of us were there, and I'm at that time more of a hustler kind of kid, and I'm asking, well, what do you do? Well, I'm an art director. Well, I'm a producer. Well, I'm this. Well, I'm that. Now, none of them look like me. So I, being the kind of guy I was, I'm like, well, what's an art director make? All I had to hear was one time what they made, and I realized I was on the wrong side of things.
Right.
So I started to investigate, what does it take to become an art director? Am I questioning, and where do they hang out? And in those days, everybody tended to hang out at Fridays. They did lunch there, they had meetings there, and so forth. So I would have lunch there and show up. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you again. So I'm hanging out with these guys, and from that, when Apple came out with Mac, I'm meeting these guys. A year later, I was doing more of my flyers and so forth, and the various materials I was producing for because I was in barbershops and salons for the most part.
Sure.
They received materials from a distributor. That distributor wanted to know who was doing their flyers. They sent the distributor to me. So the distributor had a system where they did co-op advertising for beauty salons and so forth, distributing hair care products, Black hair care products, Carefree Curl and Luster and all those sorts of brands. And I became kind of a linchpin for them to do flyers. So they became a new client, just doing flyers. But the flyers have been more successful for them than anything else they were doing. And plus, the other brands, some of the brands that I just mentioned, were asking them, who's doing your stuff now?
Gotcha.
So it turns out they had accrued, I don't know, $1.3 million in co-op dollars, and they were just punching out these little flyers, didn't really know what else to do with it. And being the guy I was, what about an agency? I just met all these agency people, and I'm finding out knew what they made. And I'm like, I want to get there. Maybe this is my bridge. So I made the proposal. They said, we like the proposal. When can we do this? And
Amazing.
I don't know, a couple months later, okay, we want to make you a creative director. We're going to start this thing together. We're going to pay you, this is 1985, so it's about $25,000 a year. It was all over at that point.
Wow.
So within this large distribution company, I found a space to put a drawing table, computer. It was just me. It was nobody else, just me. And so from there, every pencil, every piece of paper, I didn't know what freelancers were. I didn't know I was a freelancer. So I found out that. And I started hiring other Black folks who were doing flyers. They were in the same hustle that I was in. and called them art directors. And I went, what's an art director? Well, I'm going to show you what an art director is. And we grew it from there. A year later, we were in an office. We had 4 or 5 people, in addition to infrastructure with, finance and so forth. And we were building it. Now, their largest client was Kmart. That was the largest client they distributed to, in addition to other smaller places. And that relationship just kind of blossomed from there. Kmart's doing its thing. What's happening independently is going on. We're growing at the same time. And we were doing print and radio, just the 2. So we're doing full packages for Kmart, and they were doing what they call inserts, and then point of sale materials. And all this is new to me. I don't know any of this. In fact, the first ad that I did for that agency, I probably would have fired me at that point, because I didn't know what RGB and CMYK was. I went to a photographer who did senior pictures at my church to shoot the ad.
Right.
He turned over the film to me. I gave that to the post house.
Sure.
Didn't know what a post house was, but I know I manually did the ad, turned over all the materials, and I didn't know what a match print was. I didn't know how to proof. I never saw a proof. I didn't know what that concept was, that process. The next time I saw what I turned over to post was in the magazine. It was in Essence and Ebony magazine.
Wow.
It was horrible.
Oh my God.
It was bad. It was bad. If you ever seen a CMYK on an RGB screen, you know how things go blue and black.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was in a national magazine.
Man.
And I would have fired me. I definitely would have fired me. But I explained it, what took place. They're like, all right, we can't do this again. So I went to the Post guy. I went to go meet it personally, the owner. And I said, I need to learn this. Can you walk me through it? He became my college, as it were, on how to take what was in here to produce it in a digital file format that he could use, and then how to proof that before it actually went out and was inserted to the magazines.
Of course.
And then from there, everything took off because the work improves exponentially. I was able to teach staff, which I only had, 2 or 3 people, but able to teach them. And I duplicated myself, replicated myself.
Right.
So everybody's working and doing things. And I started to pick up doing radio. So now I started writing and then going in and producing radio spots. And I probably spent 20% of my time in the studio doing radio, because we were doing all the radio for Kmart and a number of other retailers that were selling black hair care products. Then one day, the voiceover talent didn't show up. I'm booked for 5 hours. It's going to be paid for one way or another. I said, give me the script. Show me what to do with this microphone. I went in the booth, and fast forward, I ended up doing probably $50,000 radio spots in the course of 7 years.
Wow.
So I ended up spending about half my time in the studio. While the staff was doing print, I was doing radio, and that's how we grew the agency.
That's incredible. And I guess for me, the key takeaways from your early experiences kind of underpin a lot of your career, or as I come to understand it. So first you have a situation where you network and you build relationships. So you're using this process to meet people and to kind of understand the lay of the land. So you're figuring out where the opportunities are. And then you've identified a niche and you've kind of gone, okay, well, this is a market that I can serve and I can be of value to. And if we were looking at it as typical designers or creatives, what we're taught when we go to university or when we come out of college is we're looking to work with Coke. We're looking to work with big brands and huge agencies. And sometimes we don't think of serving the community around us and all of these niches, because these are all opportunities and these are all viable markets. And a lot of people will talk about the smallest viable market. What's the smallest viable market you can serve and still survive? And often
Yeah.
in those spaces, you find businesses thrive because they're overlooked by other people on their way to big agencies. So you've identified a niche, and then you've utilized the resources around you in terms of hiring people from your community, but also tapping them up in order to make yourself better and for you to learn those lessons along the way. And it kind of feels like, that start has had a fundamental impact on your work.
It has been the core, because at a certain point, I again, still interacting with other agency folks. And even though I was doing, we were doing okay, they were doing television. I wanted to do television. I'm like, I'm in the recording studio. So I'm in the recording studio, and the guy in the next booth is doing recording, but he's doing it for his television spot. He's doing the next thing. I'm like, what is that? What's wrong with that? Similar kind of thing. But what I think, as you kind of pointed out, what's critical is that I've always been a guy who's seen the world half full, the glass half full in that analogy. Never been the half empty guy. So no matter where I was, it was always more to fill.
Sure.
And in my mind, it wasn't just for me. So I'm looking at what's going on with my people, because that wasn't something I was ever exposed to, not in my family. Most of the people I know, nobody ever talked about advertising. Nobody talked about making a living being creative or anything like that. It was always lawyer, doctor, other things like that, educators and so forth. And there was this whole group of people in our culture, and we all know this. Some of the most creative people on the planet look like us.
Yes, sir.
And you layer on a little bit of intellect, a little bit of skill set, and some access with somebody that's smart and hungry, you can change the world. And I started to see that everywhere. So there was potential all around me, everywhere I went. And then that's what really kind of got my appetite going. And I said, well, I never thought I couldn't do television. It never occurred to me that I couldn't do TV commercials. But I couldn't do it the agency I was with. And something I didn't mention was that my partners at the first firm didn't look like me at all. They were from a completely different culture.
Yeah.
And it was very specific, I'll say.
Sure.
And we were always ancillary to what their vision was, never really intrinsic to what their vision is.
Gotcha.
And after 8 years of that, I realized this isn't going to happen this way. So I cashed out, took a beat, took a break, looked around, assessed things. And then some of the people I had met, I got a call. We heard you're available. The owner would like to talk to you. I went to go see him. He was on the phone. He's paused on the phone. He said, I heard you're available. I said, yeah, but available for what? He said, when can you start? Whatever you're making, I'll double it. When can you start?
Wow.
I said, give me a couple of months. I got to clean some stuff up, get done. He's like, can you do a couple of weeks? I said, yeah, we could do a couple of weeks. He said, you need to meet my creative director. They'll set it up. Thanks for coming in. That was my interview.
Boom.
Now, mind you, in Detroit, Black ad world was very small. So anybody that was doing stellar work, there were only a few of us. Literally, there were only two Black creative directors in the city. And I was one of them. And so that was the extent. I came out the door. I was in there maybe 2 minutes. I came out, my associate, she said, you're out, you're done. What happened? I said, well, he wants me to start in 2 weeks. She just kind of heated, because he's supposedly a tough guy. He's just real, former football player and really tough. I said, that's what he just said. And that was it. That was the start.
Done deal.
And my life changed from there. I literally grew up as an ad professional at that firm. Most of the things I had done up until that point were the bits and pieces of the foundational elements on how to do and think advertising. but never really with the resources or the exposure to really go global or expand. But in that simple 2-minute meeting, changed everything.
That's incredible.
Everything flipped. I mean, it was like going with a warp speed. Like being on Star Trek and you hit the thing and, you know, that's what happened. No, it was very intimidating. Don't get me wrong. It was very intimidating because I had to learn a lot of things I was never exposed to, never taught. But it became my school, you know, again, more of my college. That college I walked away from after 8 days. That was more of it.
That's incredible. One of the things that stands out for me about that story is typically when designers are thinking or talking about finding work or landing clients, it's always this active pursuit of clients. Whereas what you did was you empowered yourself by building something that allowed people to come to you. And I think it's a really important distinction, because so often when I speak to younger designers, the focus is on portfolio. The focus is on what should I say? What should I do? How should I be? Should I stand here? Should I stand there? Should I stand back? Should I wear this? Should I not wear this? When my advice is always build something so they come to you. Like whatever you can do around you, like whether it's serving a smaller market or whether it's a self-initiated project or whether it's just developing whatever you have access to. So, you know, if your uncle has, I don't know, a real estate company, like doing work for that in order to build that up, because that allows people to come to you rather than this endless cycle of just taking your portfolio around, because it becomes such an easy thing to dismiss somebody on that basis, especially if you're challenged on industries that have incredibly low representation to begin with. So I think that story to me is a great example of you building something and allowing people to come to you.
You know what I found about that portfolio model is one that was designed, and this is just my personal opinion. It was one that was designed by an old boys network.
Oh yeah.
Because I had, you know, according to others, a brilliant portfolio. But looking like I do, going into most of the offices that I wanted to see my portfolio, I sat literally for hours in outer offices waiting for portfolio reviews that took 20 seconds, we'll call you, and I never heard from them. And I realized the instant I walked in, they have no intention of ever calling me.
Yeah.
There was never a question about the book. It was perfunctory for them. And I realized maybe after a dozen of those, and I went all over. I went to New York, went to Chicago, different places. And they were not interested in, one, any kind of Black work. Two, they were not interested in that coming from someone who looked like me. They were using art directors who didn't look like us to do what they called their cultural work or Black work.
Right.
And I realized, okay, this is not the system I need to function from. And, you know, you do your own internal contemplations. And historically, I mean, our ancestors, we're merchants. That's what we do. We call it hustling today, but we're mercantile culture. We buy and sell and extend and grow, and that's what we do to increase culturally. And you take those sensibilities and apply them to a broader world. And it's kind of like Reginald Lewis, you can't stop us. You know, we always see opportunities everywhere we go. Yeah. And that whole portfolio thing, and I talk to young people now, I'm like, what are you really using your portfolio for? I don't even think they look at bags anymore. You know, everybody's on a website, they want a link. They meet you long before they ever meet you. Because they're doing their research, they're able to get what they need. If you've done the necessary things you need to online for your own personal branding or professional branding, they don't really need to meet you.
Yeah.
I mean, really,
that's it.
You know. And if you're doing stellar work or work that's highly competitive, typically an interview isn't the thing. It's more at a dinner or a lunch or some association. I mean, I talk to young people all the time. I'm saying, and they asked me, well, I'm having trouble trying to go to the next level. I'm like, well, what associations do you belong to? And I know they're elitist, don't get me wrong. I know AIGA and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
But what organizations are you investing in to be where they are?
Yeah.
Well, none. Well, then how do you expect them to get to know you? Because they have to know you before they hire you.
Yeah.
And they're not going to know you from 20 minutes in a room, never having met you.
Yeah, that's
Besides that, what kind of follow-up do you do for the interviews that you do? Follow-up? Yeah, follow-up. Thank you. Card, get permission to send them things on an ongoing basis. I said, there's a story. John H. Johnson told, we were at lunch once. John H. Johnson was a founder of Ebony Magazine, Ebony Jet.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're at lunch once, and I forget what city, but he told the story about how they were trying to get their cosmetics line into London. And it was complete blockade, never going to happen. They were told point blank, never going to happen. So he talked to his wife, Eunice, and for 1 year, every Monday, he sent someone to, I forget the name of the retailer, but he sent them to this retailer. And for 1 year, the retailer never met the guy that he sent. He had a scheduled appointment, show up on Monday, and he sat there. That's where he had his lunch. He sat there in the outer office and waited. Every Monday for 1 year. Now, around the 13th month, as the story goes, the guy finally came out on his way someplace else to tell him to his face, this is never going to happen. And in that time period, he always, this is the part I didn't say, he always took, I don't know what you call it. You've seen in movies, rich people show up to a hotel and they have all this luggage.
Oh, yeah, the carousel things.
Yes. He showed up every Monday for 1 year with all of their products. So it wasn't just him sitting there. He had a service person, brought the stuff up. So just in that 20 seconds, he met that guy, go into the elevator. He says, I understand. I really appreciate you speaking to me right now. I brought something for you just in case you'd like the opportunity to just look at our stuff, even if you don't want to meet me. A week later, ring, ring, come back. We'd like to talk to you. We think you have a spot for you in our store. Wow. And we're all sitting, we were all young executives sitting around John H. Johnson talking. And he said, that's how we got into London. He said, don't ever accept no. And, you hear these things when you go to talks and so forth. And that's where never give up. Because a lot of times I'm talking to things and I always tell people, never give up. I don't care how dark it gets, how unfair, how useless, how all of that. Just don't give up. Keep it moving.
I think there's also a lesson in there in that if you're facing barriers, so if as Black and POC creatives and designers, we're facing barriers in these industries that we're trying to get through, I think the lesson there is that we have to innovate. Yes. That we can't go through the same channels as everybody else. Because there are instances, like I've spoken to HR directors who will flick through resumes and filter out any surname that sounds African or Caribbean. Yes. And so these are the barriers that we're facing, right? So in that case, we have to innovate. So, when we're talking about that hustle and we're talking about making something out of nothing, that we have to find different pathways in order to get our work out there or to get our foot in the door or to get in front of someone. So, I think that's a really, really vital lesson there.
It's not just the getting in. I mean, to me, getting in should be the easy part. That's kind of learning your skill set, how to talk to people, how to read a room, how to pick up the vibe, what the challenges are to navigating to get where you want to go. Just like anything else, you find the roadmap, you map it out, and you go do it, you execute. But even when you're inside, there are these additional barriers. Like, so I told you I went from print and radio to television, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm on set here in Los Angeles at that time. I'm from Detroit, here in Los Angeles. And we would spend 2 months out here to get a spot done after 9 months of development with the client, going back and forth with Chrysler or P&G or whoever we were working with. and spent a lot of time invested in getting this done. And then to get here in Los Angeles, I'm spending $450,000 on a 30-second spot to have a production company tell me, I go on set, I'm thinking naively that they're going to be sensitive to, this is a Black agency, we're doing work for the African-American community, so we should go find some talent that represents them on set. Nobody, not even craft services.
Oh my.
And it's first day. My first day, first set for Chrysler. And it was the oddest feeling. But again, I never thought it couldn't happen. You know, today we talk about 30% and the different things we went on a Hollywood set and so forth. I had no idea it was some kind of movement or anything like that back in '94. I had no idea. All I know was, y'all better have some Black folks on set tomorrow. And so I called back to Detroit. I said, whoever you need to talk to right now, stop what you're doing and put the list together. And I sent them the call sheet. I said, whoever's on this call sheet that has a union, organization, something, find me somebody and put a list together that I can give this production company. And 24 hours later, or less than 24 hours later, we were on set. First thing, early morning, get there 7:30, craft services. It was a Black woman. I'm like, okay. Even the security guard was Black. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, okay, good move, but we'll see what happens. So I'm dealt with the producers. We're doing our pre-meeting in the morning, and people are showing up to set. I go walk in because there was no makeup artist. It was nobody the day before. So I walk in the booth, in the trailer, and there's a Black woman in there. And so I go over here, and then I didn't know what a PA was really. And there's Black folks running around with cables and lights and moving stuff and so forth. So I'm good with that. So I talked to my producer. I said, what do they do? He said, well, they do this, this, and this. I'm like, okay, well, who's operating that camera and that light, and who's telling them what to do? She said, hold on. Called over who the new crew was.
Oh, okay.
And the second AD was Black. Best boy was Black. I hate that name, however. Was Black. And the DP had an assistant.
Right.
Now, I've never really known a DP to have an assistant, but part of their crew they brought on was a Black guy. And so I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm feeling good, feeling better. But from that, and that was a kind of a test thing. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just know I needed to do something.
Yeah.
But from that, for the next 10 years, it was mandatory for every production company that we work with. And we had our pre-approved tier sheet on who we liked. First tier, second tier, third tier, depending upon the budget for the project. And we ended up getting Academy Award-winning audio people, DPs, directors, some of everybody that came through. And it's like, no, we need to have this. And as a matter of fact, craft services, this is who we're going to use. Because we were doing a thing where we were introducing the neon, and we were shooting in the Valley of Fire outside of Vegas. Now, if you've ever been to Valley of Fire, there's nothing there. It's just rocks. Wow. It's a desert and rocks, and it's an hour from the city. And there's no soul food down the street they can go order from. So what we do on set is they have these food trucks, they're huge food trucks, and they set up everything, tables, tents, everything in the sun and all that. Well, they found a brother and a Mexican. They had this amazing food truck. They had macaroni and cheese, they had ribs, they had some greens and all like that. And now mind you, there's 60 people on set as a crew. 20-30% of them were Black. So we had the traditional steak and potatoes and those sorts of things, which was cool. And that satisfied the larger crew. But then our crew, our team, felt satisfied, but everybody felt gratified. And it kept, because critical on a set, particularly a commercial set, is important to have everybody feel connected and not just being told what to do. So in that regard, if the AD is the one who's actually giving crew orders is Black, it changes the dynamic. Now, those that don't look like us may have been a little uncomfortable, but if they're intelligent, they wouldn't have expressed it.
Right.
They just did their job.
Gotcha.
But, not saying anything against Hollywood system or anything like that, but some of the best directors that I learned from didn't look like us. They took time, they were patient, they explained things to me. Some of them, we ended up doing posts in Europe a few times. We were running to Spain, going to Germany, different places. And they were always the ones who really exposed me. I also knew everything wasn't going to come from us.
Right.
So we want to be able to collaborate and share knowledge. So I was exposed to those things as well.
There's a great takeaway there, I think, in terms of getting internal buy-in and using whatever position or influence you have to create environments when you have buy-in, and that creates more collaborative environments and work environments. And it's something that the tech industry and a lot of startups have embraced in terms of trying to keep everybody it's more than happy but validated, like you want people to, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. It's incredible the amount your work is generating in market share and volume at this point, and the brand list, which is like a dream list for anybody who works in advertising. So
we did okay.
Yeah. I mean, what's your thinking at this point? Where do you go from here? What's your thinking before you start thinking about making a pivot?
Well, I wish I could tell you that the pivot was strategic. For whatever reason, at the 10-year mark with the firm I was with, done all these great things, won all these awards. We were on the BET Top 100 agency list and all that stuff for a considerable period of time. Did some good stuff. But at a particular point, it was here. So we did a spot for Verizon with, there's a young lady, Tweet. She did a song called Call Me.
Oh, yeah.
And we did a collaborative spot where they were already doing a music video on her here in Los Angeles. And we had this new brand coming out for Verizon Wireless. So we collabed with, I think it was Epic Records, Sylvia Rome. And we negotiated a deal where we would go to the shoot. They would shoot certain scenes of the video specifically for us. We were doing the, Can You Hear Me Now? And then this and all that back then. And so we did that, did phenomenally in the marketplace. Crazy numbers, spiked like crazy. So that was my entree to talk to my boss. Let's do some more branded entertainment. We got to be based in LA, so forth and so on. I always hated the cold. It was an opportunity. So I'm out here. They moved me out here to Los Angeles. We're putting things together, and we're developing some stuff. Took about 5 months to start to get in the doors so people would take my call and return calls and things like that, because it takes time.
Yeah.
And just as we're doing that, I got a call from HR unceremoniously. We're calling to let you go. I paused. Said, so are you going to honor the tenets of the contract? A voice in the back of the room on that end said, we're going to honor everything. I'm like, okay, cool. I got a really great severance. The contract was tight. So I'm good. We're going to pivot and do something else.
Right.
It wasn't my choice. It wasn't my timing or anything like that. But 6 months later, literally to the day, I tried this, I tried that. Every phone call that I made from all the people I had worked with, everybody, only one person returned my call. One. This guy called me and said, look, I got this project. I don't know if you really want to do it. It's they need a commercial. You do commercials. I don't really do commercials. Maybe you want to call him back. I'll send you the number. He sent me the number. And my severance was just about up. I mean, because I was hustling. I'm trying to get stuff going, and not a lot happening. Building the portfolio, doing that, and thinking that gave me accessibility, which it didn't. So it turns out all the stuff I learned when hustling on the street and building that little agency at the beginning, and then growing at the other firm, all that stuff turns out worked with this. It turns out to be this. I don't know if you're familiar with Christian world, but there was an event called MegaFest.
Okay.
Back in '05. My friend got a call from them. They needed somebody to do some advertising. They thought they needed one spot. I took a call, 20-minute discovery call. And they said, well, this is what we need, so forth and so on. And they talked to me as though I was a vendor. And I talked to them as an opportunity. Gotcha. And so they said, well, we're having our last big scheduled meeting with all of our vendors tomorrow. You're welcome to come to it.
Right.
Like I said, I'm at the end of my severance, a few $1,000s left. It's a $415 ticket, round trip, to go down to Dallas. And I'm like, do I take this, go down there? Because nothing could happen. I mean, it could be just like other trips I took.
Yeah.
And I bought the ticket, went down. They picked me up, went to the meeting. It was a meeting not unlike other meetings I've had, major event. People are getting together, last looks before everything goes live. And I told them, I said, you're cutting yourself short if you think you just need a spot. This is what you really need after that meeting. And I told them in a few seconds, this is what you need. Boom, 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 boom. He said, don't move. He went and got T.D. Jakes. I never met the man, heard about him, seen him on television. Brought him over. He had already talked to T.D. Jakes. And Bishop came over and he said, I heard you have another vision for what we need to be doing. He said, we have all these people here and nobody's ever told me what you just told me, so forth and so on. And, he's a kind of imposing guy.
Yeah.
And, but not anybody I haven't met before, worked with before. Advertising is a tough business. So I met some tough people. You're working in the music industry and so forth and so on. It's like, okay, all right, well, are you done? I heard what you just said, but this is what's going to happen. And I told him what I believe what was going to happen. Well, how do you know what's going to happen? Well, these are a couple things I've done. And he kind of backed up. We should talk more. So we went to go have a bite. As Lord would have it, at the end of that, I told him what he needed. And we ended up doing a 10-spot campaign with all the other accoutrements that go with television in the next couple of months before launch.
Amazing.
And it helped to make that the largest urban Christian festival ever.
Incredible.
And that kind of launched the pivot.
Right.
Took this severance down to almost zero. And then that happened. That was a blessing. And then everything started to go the other direction. Because after MegaFest, everybody wanted to know who did that. Just like before.
Gotcha.
Who did that?
Yeah.
Just on a different level.
Yeah.
And so all of these other, and this is the mid 90s, mid 2005. So, and a lot of what was happening in urban Christian ministry was trying to transition from kind of basic elemental neighborhood stuff to more global, broad stream stuff.
Sure.
I ended up being that guy. So I'm taking on clients as a consultant to help them all over the country to do what they wanted to do, and rebuild their brand. They didn't really understand what brand was. So it was a lot of exposure, a lot of education, and it was a joy to do. And it exposed me to what we were talking about, a more sophisticated niche mindset. And now kids talk about the riches and niches and all those sorts of things. And we weren't thinking that back then. Honestly, it's not how we termed it. We were Black men and women who were concerned about our culture, had more resources than perhaps our ancestors or our previous leaders did, and we wanted to make good decisions about how to move us forward.
Yes.
And that started a whole new direction, on how I was moving forward. But it gave me a different sensibility about having had all this other big time experience, dealing with people who were founders and creators. It's very different than dealing with corporations, because the projects we did then were line items for them, part of a larger strategic agenda. When you're dealing with founders and creators, you're dealing with their after-tax dollars and them needing to be able to make something happen with it now.
Yes.
Not 2 years from now.
Yes.
2 months from now. And that's a different timetable, different sensibility. And because I had all this other experience, I was able to bring that to bear in a very short period of time and crystallize things for them. I learned how to articulate short term so they could see where they could be in the next 6 months and how we were going to get there. And that's what we started to do. And that was the beginning of the pivot. And that's what involved me with Tavis Smiley. That's how we got connected with Smiley Books.
Gotcha. Right.
Because I'm out there doing what I was just experiencing. I'm out there doing what I'm doing and merging, in that Christian world. And Tavis is adjacent. And same people are going to the same meetings, same golf clubs, so forth and so on. Well, who did your stuff? I met this guy that used to do this.
Right.
And maybe he can help you. And Tavis had just done an imprint with Hay House called Smiley Books. He didn't know what he didn't really know what to do. He's a television guy. So he's doing this thing with television. And I got a call. Somebody I knew somebody there. Again, I got a call.
Yeah.
And went to this meeting with a nice woman. And went in there, had the meeting. Wasn't a terribly exciting meeting. But the follow-up calls from there changed my whole trajectory. Because, as we were talking about earlier, my mindset had always been, what's the next big thing? Not just the next thing, but what's the next big thing? Well, I'd kind of gone to the top of the big things. And I wasn't necessarily feeling sorry for myself, but it's like, how can I get back to that? But I found I was chasing the game.
Yeah.
And the game was playing me. So what's happening here? So publishing, I knew nothing about, literally nothing. But they called me, asked me to do their logo, did a logo, knocked that out. But in that, and I try and talk to young people about this a lot of times, because I know we live in the age of apps, and it's kind of what I say everybody hides behind. But going to the next level in business is not in an app. It's still looking somebody in the eye, using your voice, using your skills, articulating, reading the room, being able to pitch, being able to explain what it is and discover what it is that's there to do that's new. And so in that short exchange, we did the logo, and it was just a logo. Seriously, it was just a logo.
Yeah.
But they said, well, our first project with them is a historical book, 100 Years of Black History. And I'm like, okay. And so from there, when that book came out, it really kind of told me, so, there are probably more people like this that need this the way that I would do it, and maybe not just arrogantly me, but exposed to somebody like me to be able to talk to them. Because every project that I do, what I know is brought to bear. I mean, I'm able to share unique empirical information about, no, I know you want to do that, so it's don't do that, do this. I know that's what you're thinking, but this is why you can probably modify that thinking perhaps and do it this way and get these kind of results. And I can speak with a sense of authority because I've been there. Most of the independent authors, independent publishers that I work with, they are still dreaming about what their company and their story and their brand can become. They've never sat in a brand meeting at P&G and taught color psychology in the urban community. I've never been exposed to that.
Yeah.
But I have, and the results of that, I can share with someone who has a simple book. It's $1,000. They're investing after-tax dollars, and they got to make it happen.
That's it.
I understand that the blood, sweat, and tears that they've gotten into the writing and the editing and all the processing and so forth, just to get to that point.
Yeah.
And then to take that and say, well, your cover does not have to be pretty. It does not have to be beautiful. It has to be effective. And they'd be able to take, simple things from advertising and marketing and say, look, you got to do 3 things for your cover. It's packaging, just like soup and cereal or anything else you get in the supermarket. It's packaging. You got to get people, you got to grab attention, you got to build desire, you got to drive action. That's what you got to do. That's your business now. You've already done your story. This is what you need to transition to. Let's do this. And I make myself available to every client for as long as we're working on the project. And hopefully they're better for it. I get letters and notes and things like that. They're always better for it after the project because they're able to take that. And if they never come back to me again, because I'm not cheap, I'm kind of expensive. They want to take that information and try and do it themselves. So even now, I'm putting together a whole DIY campaign to be able to share with independents that don't necessarily have the resources to use somebody like me. They may use a smaller startup designer, what have you, and but they can do it with a sense of knowledge and confidence. These are the steps we need to do.
There's just a couple of things that really stand out for me in that story. And the first thing I want to talk about is too many creatives have this misgiving about this being a creatively driven business. This essentially is about risk mitigation. You know what I'm saying? And what you've done, or what you've achieved in your work, is you've mitigated that risk for your clients.
Yes.
You've put yourself in a position where you can say, look, I'm taking your hard-earned money that you need to see a return on fast, and I'm the least risky option for that return.
Good way to put it.
That's market standard, high quality work that's going to get you what your objectives are. Because, when people buy creative, they're not buying it because they want to see creative things. They're not buying it just for artistic value. In terms of the design and creative industry and the ad industry, they're trying to solve a problem, and they're trying to look, what's the most efficient way for me to solve this problem? And what happens in the Black community is sometimes we don't allow ourselves to be in that space. We look at each other like as though we're risky propositions. So a lot of times in the work we do as Black creatives, if we can position ourselves to be knowledgeable and to be professional and to know our worth and to know how much things cost, the amount of times I speak to businesses that just have no idea what design costs, what websites cost. And we have to get better. We need to have a deeper understanding of the industries that we work in. We need to learn about them on a level that we can kind of go, okay, look, this is the problem you're trying to solve. Here's a value that I can deliver. Because when you spoke about your story earlier, one of the things that really jumped out at me was you weren't pitching, you were offering value. You gave value. Yeah. So it wasn't a case of, hey, I can upsell you on this, or I can upsell you on that. You're like, look, this is where you're at. This is how you can be better. This is what you need to empower yourself. And that empowers your prospective client, whether they hire you or not. And suddenly they look at you not as somebody who's trying to sell them something. They go, oh my God, this guy's helping me. This guy's helping me build my vision. And that becomes in itself so powerful in terms of the work we do. Now that you're fairly established in this space, what does it mean to you to be able to empower and champion independent Black publishers and businesses through your work?
Hopefully, as the dots become connected, because a lot of what we do is connecting dots. Mm-hmm. There's a few standout self-publishers or independent publishers that are starting to make headway in a larger way. The major mainstream publishing firms, I guess there's big 5 now, they're doing imprints. Right. And those imprints, I think at the beginning we're using non-Black talent to do the covers because that's what they believed was their, the market. They didn't know we existed. So I think as we, as independents, started to work more intelligently, more collaboratively. Collaborative is huge because other cultures, that's how they grow, is collaborate. I think as we start to think more that way, we'll be able to share information and then tap into what the industry offers. See, because independent publishing is a growing market. A lot of what's going on in the world has been going on the last 10 years or so is either flat on the downward curve, but not a lot of them on the upward curve except for tech. So I think it's really going to take the collaboration of being able to share information, be willing to work together and learn from each other. Well, everything doesn't have to be tech, because tech will get into MVP. It's got to be a minimally viable product. Let's do that. Let's go get money to fund it, and so forth and so on. That's one avenue. But then there's, I have this much money. I have this idea. I know you do this. Can you do this for me? And then can you help me to get it out there? And that's where the tech, they start to interact. They cross over right there. Being able to get them to listen to each other, I'm finding, is the kind of the next hurdle to get them to understand each other and so forth. Many times I look forward to talking to groups, more intimate groups and larger groups, but to groups to share with them there's another way. But in the world that we're in right now, it's taking a little bit to make it a little bit more, not necessarily make it a whole lot. Yes, there are a few that do that. But there's this young man named John Henry. He has I think it's John Henry style. There's this thing that he says that really struck me. And I guess I follow him last couple of years or so. Very bright. Reminds me a lot of me back in the day, straight hustler, whatever level of sophistication, still hustling. But he says this thing it's about a transference of confidence.
Yes.
And in that, what you were talking about mitigation, risk, mitigating risk. The transference of confidence really becomes the linchpin on how to get people to talk. Yes. Because it's I've achieved a certain amount, you've achieved a certain amount, you've achieved a certain amount. How can we put it together to collaborate to get something bigger done? Because this social media kind of makes us all individuals, but we still need to collaborate. Yes, we can sit at the computer. I used to, when I started, it took an airbrusher to go do things, and you need a production person to do things and so forth. You can do all that now in an hour yourself in front of a computer. That doesn't change the fact that you don't need to talk to the other individuals.
Yes.
That do the certain parts that are necessary to do things, and particularly doing publishing. It's a lot. It's writers and editors and producers and project managers and so forth, to get one project done. But we've kind of convinced ourselves we can do it all by ourselves. And it just is not the way that we're going to move forward. Doing it that way, you kind of stay at a certain level.
Of course.
And particularly now, the goal is to take, that nickel and make it $1. And that $1 to make 100. And it takes other people to help do that. And you can't make everything. I talk to these young designers and they want to take every dollar and say, no, hire another designer. How about that? Yes. You're not that good at that. Hire somebody else to do that part. You make 60% versus 100%, but you can do 5 projects at the same time. Why not do that?
Yes.
So, it's another way to look at it.
And with that confidence comes trust and faith. Yes. And so much of the work we do is relationship based. And people think that it's output driven. I make websites. The output is a website. I would argue that the output was the collaboration between you and the client. Yes. The website was just the artifact of that relationship. So in that relationship, in that relationship, we need that trust and we need that confidence, not just in terms of getting the job done, but just in terms of how we see business. And you can't have that connection without that confidence and without that faith and without that trust. So again, I think that's a really powerful distinction, and we need to stop looking so, being so myopic about our work and how we want to work, and, just open ourselves up. That's the only way we're going to move forward, right?
That's good. That's good. Great way to say it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been amazing today. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this session. I think there's so much in there for people to take away. It's just been absolutely great. My thanks to Juan for joining me today. My belief is that his work and journey can show other creatives the power of serving a niche and how we can build value and empower communities by focusing on the smallest viable market. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with this space. For everybody listening and watching, you can view Juan's work at creativelunacy.com. That's creative, LUNACY, all one word, .com, or on Instagram at Juan Roberts. You can also find these links in the show notes or on the full episode page, which you can find at bunbury.co/podcast. That's BUNBURY.co/podcast. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to join me again next week for more inspiring conversations. Thank you again, Juan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
You've been listening to Design for the People with Greg Bunbury.